The first time Carter Bennett came to the farm, he arrived in a black SUV with a company logo on the door and a smile that had never once been surprised by the word no. I was fixing the irrigation line on the north field when I heard tires on the gravel. I stood up and watched my father walk out of the farmhouse to meet him, like he was greeting an old friend, arms open, laughing at something before they were even close enough to shake hands. Jason came out behind him, wearing the new boots he had bought for the occasion. I hadn't known it was an occasion. Nobody had told me.
My grandfather Harold came out last. He stood on the porch with his coffee and watched. Carter Bennett had a folder. He opened it on the kitchen table, while my grandfather sat across from him, and my father and Jason flanked him like bodyguards, or like men who believed they were about to inherit something. I stood in the doorway. Nobody asked me to sit down.
"The offer is $12 million, Carter said. Cash, 60-day close. We'd take the full 214 acres, the mineral rights, everything contiguous." He slid a single page across the table. "Mr. Parker, this is a generational number. There's not another offer like this in the county." My grandfather looked at the page for a long time without touching it. "What would you build?" he said. "Mixed-use development. Retail, residential, some light commercial on the eastern parcel near the road." "What happens to the land?" Carter smiled, the way men smile when they consider a question beside the point. "It gets developed. That's the idea." My grandfather picked up his coffee cup. "I'll think about it." My father's jaw tightened. "Dad, this isn't something you think about. This is $12 million. I know what $12 million is, Richard. The farm is worth maybe two and a half on a good market. These men are offering 5 times value. 5 times. My father leaned forward. "You're 81 years old. What are you doing with 200 acres? "Farming them," my grandfather said. The silence that followed was the kind that had history in it. Carter Bennett excused himself to take a phone call that I suspected he had arranged in advance. My father turned to my grandfather and dropped his voice, but not enough. "This is happening," he said, "one way or another. You can sign now and get full value, or you can wait until there's a conservatorship conversation, and then none of us control the timeline." I said from the doorway, "You're threatening him." My father turned around like he had forgotten I existed, which, in all likelihood, he had. "Emily, this is a family conversation." "I'm family." He looked at me for exactly 2 seconds, then turned back to my grandfather. "Think about it. That's all I'm asking." My grandfather looked at me over my father's shoulder. He had the expression he used when he was being patient with someone who didn't deserve it. Then he looked back at my father and said, "I've thought about it. The answer is no." My father left that afternoon without saying goodbye to me. Jason brushed past me in the driveway and said, quietly, not quite under his breath, "You always have to make everything harder." I went back to the irrigation line and finished what I had started. That was 7 months before my grandfather died. In between, my father made the drive to the farm 4 more times. Each visit followed the same shape. He would arrive with new numbers, new projections, new arguments. He would sit at the kitchen table and speak to my grandfather in the voice of a reasonable man presenting obvious conclusions. My grandfather would listen and say no. My father would leave angry. I would stay, and we would have dinner together. And my grandfather would say very little about any of it, which was how I knew it was affecting him more than he showed. The 4th visit, my father brought a lawyer. Not Margaret Collins, who had handled the family's legal affairs for 30 years and would have told him directly what she thought of the approach. A different one. Younger, with a briefcase and a document about power of attorney and decision-making capacity. I drove out that same evening because my grandfather had called me, which he rarely did. When I arrived, the lawyer was still there. My grandfather was sitting at the kitchen table with his arms crossed and an expression I had never seen on him before. Something between fury and something older and sadder than fury. I asked the lawyer to leave. He looked at my father. My father nodded, and the lawyer left. And then my father looked at me and said, "You have no idea what you're interfering with." "I know exactly what I'm interfering with," I said. He left 20 minutes later. The lawyer didn't come back. But I started driving out every other weekend after that. Not just because Grandpa needed help with the fence line and the winter prep, but because I understood now that there were people circling something that mattered, and that the only way to protect it was to be present. Christmas that year, I drove home because my mother had called 3 times, and the path of least resistance was attendance. Jason got a car. Not a used car. Not a practical car. A new truck. Black. With a bow on the hood that my mother must have ordered from somewhere because I had never seen a bow that large outside of a television commercial. He walked around it in the driveway making sounds of genuine pleasure, while my father watched with the expression of a man completing a mission. I opened my envelope at the kitchen table. Inside was a gift card to a home goods store, in a format that had been discontinued 2 years earlier, which meant it had been in a drawer since I was 23. The balance, when I checked later, was $11. My mother said, "We didn't know what you needed." I put the card in my pocket and said thank you, because what I had learned across 26 years of Christmases in that house was that the performance of gratitude cost me less than the argument. What I needed, I had always found somewhere else. I had found it every summer at a farm on Route 9, repairing fences and naming calves and sitting on a porch with a man who kept records of what mattered and stored them in a barn. My grandfather's health changed in February. It happened the way these things happen, not all at once, but in a series of small declines that each seemed minor until you lined them up and looked at the direction they were pointing. He was tired in a way that was different from old tiredness. He moved more carefully. He stopped walking the full fence line in the mornings. I drove out every weekend in February and March. I made dinners and organized medications and drove him to the appointments he had been rescheduling for months. Nora Whitmore from the adjacent property came over most mornings and kept him company while I worked the fields. And in the evenings, the 3 of us would sit on the porch and she would tell stories about the county that predated everything I knew. And he would laugh in the way he laughed when something was genuinely funny to him rather than politely funny, a distinction I had learned to read over many years. Jason visited once. He drove up on a Sunday in February, stayed for 3 hours, spent 45 minutes of that on his phone in the driveway, and left before dinner. He told my grandfather the farm looked good. He didn't ask about the medications or the appointments or the fatigue. He hugged him at the door and said, "Take care of yourself, Grandpa," with the ease of a man who intended for someone else to do that work. My father visited twice. The first time he came with a revised offer from Horizon Development, $11.5 million now, the company having adjusted their projections. My grandfather told him no before he had finished presenting it. My father argued for an hour and left. The second time, he came alone, without paperwork, and sat with my grandfather in the kitchen for 2 hours. I was in the equipment barn when he arrived, and I stayed there until he left. I don't know what they talked about. My grandfather didn't tell me, and I didn't ask, because there are things a person needs to keep private, even from the people they trust most. My grandfather died on a Thursday morning in April, in his porch chair with a cup of coffee going cold on the railing beside him. The sheriff said it was his heart. I said it was completion. He had been 81 years old and had lived exactly as he intended for every one of those years. which is an achievement so rare that most people don't recognize it when they see it. I got the call at 6 in the morning and drove 4 hours without stopping. The reading was 13 days later, in Margaret Collins' conference room on Main Street. I arrived on time and took the chair nearest the door. My father and Jason were already there, talking about the horizon timeline in voices that weren't quite low enough. My mother sat with her purse in her lap and her back straight, and the pearls she saved for occasions she considered significant. Brenda, Jason's wife, had brought a legal pad. Nobody acknowledged me when I walked in. Margaret opened the folder. She read the legal language that converts a life into a list of transferable assets. Tractor and equipment to my father. Vehicle collection to Jason. Cedar chest to my mother. Everyone received what they received and kept their faces arranged in expressions of dignified patience, saving the real reaction for the larger number they were certain was coming. And to my granddaughter, Emily Rose Parker, Margaret said, I leave the sum of $1. Brenda laughed. She tried to make it a cough, but she laughed. Jason looked at the ceiling. My father said, sounds about right, in the voice of a man who had waited a long time to say something and was satisfied to finally have the occasion. My mother did not look at me. I had grown up in a house with a favorite child, and I had never been him. I had understood this early, the way children understand the rules of the place they live in before they have language for them. Jason's baseball tournaments were calendar events. My school plays were scheduling conflicts. Jason's college applications were family projects. My acceptance letter was a conversation about realistic expectations. When I was 7 years old, I had asked for a particular book for Christmas and received a gift card to a closed store, and I had watched my brother unwrap a gaming console with a 3-month waitlist, while my father looked on with the expression of a man whose purpose had been fulfilled. I had learned to find what I needed somewhere else. I had found it at a farm on Route 9, every summer for 20 years.
My grandfather had shown me a document in his study desk drawer the summer I turned 23. I had rebuilt the south fence over 3 days, and he had stood watching and then said at the end of the third day, I want to show you something. He had opened the drawer and pointed to my name on a page full of legal language I hadn't read carefully enough and said, one day you'll understand why I keep records. I had smiled and thanked him and gone back to work, and not thought about it again for 3 years. I thought about it now. Margaret Collins had not closed the folder.
There is one additional document, she said, and the entire shape of the room changed. My father had been reaching for his jacket. Jason had clicked his pen shut. My mother was already composing herself for the exit. Margaret's voice stopped all of it. She produced an envelope from beneath the primary folder, sealed with wax. His ring impression in the center, which I recognized immediately because I had watched him press that ring into things my entire life. Letters and documents, and the back page of the leather notebook in the barn. Harold asked me to present this separately, she said. It is a supplementary legal instrument, executed 8 years ago, entirely independent of the primary will. It does not pass through probate. It was not subject to any of the pressures or negotiations conducted in the months before Harold's death. She looked at my father when she said the last sentence. He did not look away. Harold was specific about the order. He wanted the primary will read first. She broke the seal. She unfolded 4 pages. 8 years ago, Harold James Parker established the Parker Legacy Trust. At the time of its creation, he transferred into this trust the entirety of the Route 9 farm property, all 214 acres, the mineral rights on the eastern parcel, all investment and savings accounts held in his name, all royalty interests on the natural gas leases along the northern boundary, and all associated liquid assets. She turned to the second page. The combined value of assets held within this trust, as of last month's independent appraisal, is $24,700,000.
My father stood up so fast the chair hit the wall behind him. That is not possible.
It is legally complete and has been for 8 years. The assets it contains have never been part of your father's estate. They were never subject to the will you heard today. Margaret's voice had not changed in volume or speed. They were never yours to receive.
He was under duress, my father said. The last 2 years, the pressure he was under. Harold Parker executed and updated this document every year for 8 years. The most recent update was signed 14 months ago, well before any of the Horizon conversations you are likely referring to. I witnessed every signature. His capacity was never in question at any of those signings. She set the pages down. The sole named beneficiary of the Parker Legacy Trust is Emily Rose Parker. Nobody spoke. I sat very still and heard my grandfather's voice from 3 years earlier, in his study, pointing to my name on a page I hadn't read carefully enough. One day, you'll understand why I keep records. I understood now. My father turned to me. Something had gone out of him, some internal architecture that had always held his certainty in place. He looked, for the first time I could remember, like a man who had been wrong about something important and knew it. "Emily," he said. It was the first time he had addressed me directly all morning. Jason was staring at the table. "I signed the preliminary agreement with Bennett," he said, in the flat voice of a person doing arithmetic on a catastrophe. 60-day close. I already signed it. "You had no legal authority to sign any agreement regarding property you did not own," Margaret said. "The farm has belonged to Emily's trust for 8 years. Any document you executed with Horizon Development is without legal standing. I would recommend retaining your own counsel before your next communication with Mr. Bennett's office." Brenda set down the legal pad. My mother was looking at me with an expression I had never seen from her before, something that might have been the beginning of recognition if it had arrived 20 years earlier. I stood up and put on my coat. "Margaret," I said, "when can I come in to review everything?" "Whenever you're ready," she said. "I'll clear my schedule." I walked out of the conference room and did not look back. The calls started before I reached my car. I watched my phone light up with my father's name and kept walking. I drove 40 minutes to the farm, with 17 missed calls accumulating on the screen. My father twice, my mother 4 times, Jason 6 times, a number I didn't recognize that I later learned was Brenda. I turned the phone face down in the cup holder and watched the landscape open up around me. The fields and the county roads, and then the water tower with Clanton in faded blue, and then the gravel road and the oak tree and the white farmhouse. Unchanged. Waiting. Nora Whitmore was on the porch steps. She stood when she saw my car. "He asked me to wait until after," she said, and handed me an envelope with my name on the front in his handwriting. What I learned later, piece by piece, through Margaret and through Nora and through the letter itself, assembled itself into a picture I had to sit with for a long time before I could see it whole. Carter Bennett had called Jason the afternoon of the reading. The preliminary agreement Jason had signed contained a performance clause. If the property transfer did not close within 90 days, Jason owed Horizon Development a penalty of $340,000 for costs incurred. Jason had signed it without reading it carefully, which was the kind of thing that happens when you are celebrating an inheritance you don't legally own. My father had, in the weeks before the reading, used the expectation of the farm sale as collateral in a verbal arrangement with a private lender.
The arrangement was not formal enough to be legally binding, but it was documented enough to be embarrassing. The lender called him 2 days after the reading. My mother had promised her sister in Florida a significant gift. She had sent a number in a text message. The text message existed. I know these things because they told me. Not immediately, not with honesty, but eventually and in pieces. Because people tell you things when they are afraid and have run out of better options. Jason called 11 times in the first week. He left 4 voicemails. The first one was angry, the second confused, the third negotiating, the fourth something close to pleading. He used the phrase family twice in the fourth message, which I noted because he had not used it in the conference room when Margaret read out $1 and he looked at the ceiling. I know these things because they told me. Not immediately, not with honesty, but eventually and in pieces. Because people tell you things when they are afraid and have run out of better options. Jason called 11 times in the first week. He left 4 voicemails. The first one was angry, the second confused, the third negotiating, the fourth something close to pleading. He used the phrase family twice in the fourth message, which I noted because he had not used it in the conference room when Margaret read out $1 and he looked at the ceiling. She said she knew things hadn't always been easy. She said the word family again. I listened to the message twice and then set the phone down and went back to the letter I was reading. The one from the Agricultural Extension Office about the mentorship program timeline. I had not called her back. I had not decided yet if I would. Nora had given me his letter on the afternoon of the reading, and I had sat on the porch steps and read all 3 pages, while she sat beside me without saying anything, which was exactly what I needed. He told me about the trust, when he had decided to create it, which was the summer I rebuilt the south fence. He told me he had watched my father and Jason plan the sale for years, that he had listened, without revealing what he knew, and decided everything quietly, and documented it carefully. Because documentation, he wrote, is the only argument that survives a room full of people who have already decided what they want to hear. He told me about the mineral rights and the royalties, the gas company payments that had been depositing into the trust every quarter for 6 years. He told me the annual value exceeded what most people understood the surface property to be worth. And then, at the bottom of the second page, in his careful, unhurried hand, he wrote what I have read every morning since. I didn't leave you the farm because you needed it. I left it to you because you were the only one who ever loved it. On the third page, he wrote about the calves, about the leather notebook, about the summer I was 9 and named them all after storybook characters. He wrote that the notebook was the thing he showed visitors when they asked what he was most proud of. Not the mineral rights, not the acreage. The notebook with the names. I called the extension office the next morning. I told the woman I had the property, I had the resources, and I wanted to move forward on the program for young farmers in the county. She asked when I could come in. I said tomorrow. I spent that night in the farmhouse, in the guest room I had slept in every summer of my childhood, listening to the farm settle into dark. Before I turned off the light, I sat at the kitchen table with coffee made in his coffee maker and opened the leather notebook Nora had brought from the barn. He had kept adding to it. Every summer I came, every calf I named, he had written it down. 30 columns of names across 30 years, all in that careful script. The last entry was 14 months ago. The name I had given the calf that summer, underlined once, the way he underlined things he intended to keep. I closed the notebook and held it in both hands and listened to the farm outside, dark and quiet. My grandfather had built something on this land across 50 years. Not a fortune, though it had become one. A record. a set of values written into fence lines and feed schedules, and a leather notebook stored in a barn, and a trust document updated every year without anyone's knowledge for 8 years. He had been keeping records the whole time. He had told me so, and I had not understood. And then one Tuesday afternoon in a conference room on Main Street, I had understood everything at once. Outside, the fields ran dark to the tree line, and beyond it to the mineral-rich ground of the eastern parcel, and the gas lines beneath it, and the royalties that would continue arriving for 20 more years. All of it already mine. All of it already written down. I turned off the light. The farm was quiet in the way of things that have been cared for and know it. And I was exactly where I had always, in every version of my life, belonged.